mapping his idea. You have three bottom lines for any enterprise: the economic, represented by the gold circle, the social people, represented by the blue, and the environmental, obviously, represented by the green. So you have four different types of enterprises. The first produces a profit, but negative social and environmental impacts, unsustainable. The second produces a profit and a positive social impact, but a negative environmental impact, unsustainable. The third, profit, negative social impact, positive environmental impact, also unsustainable. The only one that's sustainable is the one that comes out on the positive side of the ledger on all three bottom lines. Positive profit, economic gain, positive social impact, positive environmental impact. Now, I want to give you a definition of sustainability that I think accounts for this. The sustainable business enterprise is one which can maintain profitability without engaging in the unjust exploitation of either human or natural capital. Unjust exploitation. Now, there's two senses of the term exploitation. One is innocuous. This is the non-moral sense, beneficial use. So we can exploit natural resources in a fair way, make beneficial use of them, and be sustainable. On the other hand, there's a pejorative use of the term exploitation, which it means wrongful gain. So the factory owner exploited his workers by paying them sub-minimum wages. From now on, I'll be using or assuming the pejorative sense. Now, why is exploitation wrong? Well, philosophers have different accounts. One is that it's coercive. People are coerced or forced to work in ways they wouldn't prefer. Secondly, it's degrading. You're treating people as means only rather than ends in themselves, violating Kant's second formulation of the categorical imperative. Or it's wrong because it violates a duty to protect the vulnerable, to give them due care and concern. I'm going to argue, along with Robert Mayer, that the real basis of the wrongfulness of exploitation is unfairness. Mayer argues that unjust exploiters or exploiters do wrong because they always inflict losses of a relative sort on disadvantaged parties. They harm their victims even when their interactions are mutually advantageous by failing to benefit the disadvantaged party as fairness requires. So here's the idea. Exploitation is wrong because it's unfair, where B loses something relative to a relevant standard of fairness or justice. The implications of this is that it's a mistake to judge B's relative loss against B's status quo ante. B can have their living standard or condition improved and still be exploited, because it's important to see the loss relative to a community standard of fairness, not to B's status quo ante. And B may willingly decide to be exploited. B may have no better option. The fact that someone decides to endure an exploitative condition does not remove or excuse the fact of exploitation. So here, which standards do we use? Well, in the human rights frame and labor rights frame, we have well-articulated international standards. For instance, look at this picture a minute. How many violations of international labor rights standards can you spot in that picture? Name two. Hazardous conditions, child labor, unsafe wiring. This is a glass factory in Vietnam. These are children wearing flip-flops walking around the glass factory. No safety goggles, nothing, all right? So that's a kind of a paradigm of an exploitative workshop. Now, people are going to ask, well, which standards of fairness do you use? Well, there's where the debate gets interesting, because different people have different views about which are the relevant standards and what they should say. Most people, for things like sweatshops, defer to the conventions of the International Labor Organization. It's been around for a long time, has lots of standards. It's also multi-stakeholder. Many businesses use the UN Global Compact set of 10 standards pretty straightforward and simple. Human rights, labor rights, environmental, transparency, bribery, and corruption. Many other companies use what are called multi-stakeholder standards by organizations such as the Fair Labor Association or Social Accountability International that I'm associated with. Then there's special sectoral codes, for instance, codes for mine safety. You might think about that in light of the recent news of the deaths in West Virginia. And then there's something called ISO 26000, which is a new code that's very comprehensive. Let me just talk about SA 8000. I'm on their board. I've worked with them for many years. The elements of the code are not rocket science. They're things that we all think are important standards of fairness for workers, freedom from discrimination on the basis of race, sex, religion, language, ethnicity, and so forth, compensation to meet basic needs. 1 minute, okay. Here are some of the improvements that you see when you use it. There are also environmental standards, series principles, Rainforest Alliance certificate, other principles and codes for environment. What about carbon dioxide? Well, we need a carbon dioxide standard. Why? Because our current business as usual practices are not sustainable. They're unsustainable because we've reached the limit of the Earth's finite capacity to absorb CO2 without triggering risky climate change. We're going to get global weirding. But why is this a problem about social justice? Well, because many people think that the fair way of allocating emissions rights is based on population size. Each country should have the right to emit decreasing amounts of greenhouse gases based on the size of its population. So some countries, however, have been emitting more than that for a long time, while others are just still below that per capita standard. So many people think that the older industrialized countries have been exploiting the commons. The commons are the Earth's atmosphere, our oceans, which belong collectively to all humanity. For some time, some countries have been using the commons as a CO2 sink. They've been violating what philosophers call the Lockean proviso. I'll go back to that. Now I'm going to end by telling you a children's story. We're all asked to bring a poem. I made up a children's story to illustrate this problem. I think it's so simple even a child could understand it. So indulge me for 1 minute, please, so I can tell my children's story. It's the story of the birthday cake. 1 minute, thank you. Suppose there was a birthday party with a nice cake, and 10 little birthday boys and girls were invited to the party. For each birthday boy and girl, they would get an equal share of the cake, right? And if some children took a larger share, that would be unfair. But suppose Sam gets to the party before anybody else. He sees the birthday cake and decides to take a very large piece for himself. But then the other children will be sad because there will be less cake left for them when they arrive at the party. They will feel that it is unfair for them to have a lesser share of the cake, and they will be mad at Sam. Now suppose that this birthday party lasts for 500 years. And Sam has already left the party when the other guests arrive. If you come to the party later and find there's hardly any cake left for you, you might feel that you were treated unfairly. The earlier birthday boys and girls violated a standard of fairness, and you ended up being exploited. You were very angry with them. But there's nothing you can do about it because they already left the party. So what's the moral of this story? Well, I think Al Gore put it well. We need to worry that our grandchildren will one day look back on us as a criminal generation that selfishly and blithely ignored clear warnings that their fate was in our hands. So we need to worry about intergenerational justice as well. And we need to do it now. Thank you very much.